My name is David.
And my name is Jason.
And this is Discern Realities, a Dungeon World podcast. Our first segment is What Happened to You Recently?
So, David, I have completed my 2017 Dungeon World campaign, We Hunt the Keepers. I've talked about it a little bit on previous episodes, but now that it's over, I just wanted to kind of talk about some of the highlights for me.
Awesome, yeah. That was a fantastic campaign by all accounts, and I got to participate in several of them, so I'm curious how it all wrapped up.
Well, so some numbers to begin with. We Hunt the Keepers was 26 sessions spread out over 7 different short campaigns, or short series, I guess we call them. These 26 sessions, they were 3 hours in length each, so a fair amount of dungeon worlding going on over the course of this campaign. The different sessions were Song of the Milk-White Putrescence, Children of the Eight-Legged She, The Path to Dim Carcosa, The Merry Abattoir, The Bloody Road to Bellet Osk, 10 Hidden Keys, and there was a little side story for Gauntlet Con called The Bone Crown of Old King Smule. I'm very proud of my naming schemes.
I mean, they're really good evocative names. These sound like title of books or something, you know?
Yeah, I feel like the way you get people pumped up about playing a game series is to like come up with a really, really good name. And trade secrets, sometimes I don't even know what's going to happen when I think of the name. I just come up with a name. So figure it out as we go. This was a fantastic campaign. It's probably the first time I've done like a proper campaign with a sort of like overarching story. I did a couple years ago, I did Company of the Three Kings, but that wasn't really a campaign in the sense that it didn't have much of like a unifying story. It was more of like just a pretext for having groups together. This was like an actual like legit story that developed over the course of all these sessions, and I really, really liked it. Some highlights for me. It was a fantastic proof of concept. The way we run games in the Gauntlet, it's not an automatic assumption that you can do a long-term campaign, right? We tend to run things in short series of 4 or 5 sessions. And between each of those series, like from month to month, we may not have the same players. And so one of the things that has always been something of a challenge, and it was a challenge that I was determined to take up for We Hunt the Keepers, is can we have a proper long-term campaign doing game organizing the way we do it in the Gauntlet? And I think it worked out great.
Yeah, I struggled with that earlier this year as well, last year and this year, with a longer-term campaign, but I struggled with it, I think, a bit more because I was running it off of a supplement, so things were a little bit more defined. Not completely defined, but certainly more defined than what I think the We Hunt the Keepers overarching thing was. And I think that was the key to your success. What do you think?
I think that's probably right. I mean, this sort of conceits or compromises of how we have to do games in the Gauntlet, or how we choose to do games in the Gauntlet, I should say. It's not an onerous thing. We choose to do it that way. Those compromises and conceits, compromise is not the right word, but the way we do it, it actually led to a certain type of story. And that story, it was like a story that I think we only could have gotten doing it the way we do things. So for example, it had a really unusual narrative. The story was very twisty. It was almost surreal. It was a little bit like Dungeon World by way of David Lynch. I mean, it had lots of like cosmic weirdness and lots of mystery, and we didn't explain a lot of things. Like, part of the joy of this story was kind of discovering what all that stuff meant, right? We were playing in a really, really surreal, rabbit hole kind of story space. And I think the reason why that works so well for us is because when you do have different groups, when you do have these little like smaller contained stories that link up to make a bigger story, you you have more room, you have some space to, and in fact, you must kind of have some sort of like mysteries at the edges. The background story has to be a little bit kind of vague and fuzzy. But I like the way it turned out. I mean, it was a very twisty story, very surreal story, very high level of emergent play. That was really, really key. And I think that's kind of what you were getting at earlier about Angle Kite being somewhat defined, right? Ours was very emergent. I mean, I had like a basic idea of how each series would go, like just a real rough, sketchy kind of outline of what I thought might happen. But ultimately, it was very emergent and very collaborative. And I like that aspect of it a lot too. And just kind of like hitting on the unusual narrative thing too. I actually did like what turned out as something. I started a thing that was kind of like a novelty or a gimmick in the beginning, but it actually became a really compelling part of the whole thing, which was I would run these in sets of 4 or 5 sessions, right? But the first session was always a distinct and different story, and it was about the characters going to this party of this character called Lord Caspian Gaul. And that single session for each series like repeated. And so players would basically be doing kind of the same basic actions over and over again, kind of like a Groundhog Day type thing. And that became a big part of the overarching story. Like, why do we keep doing this Lord Caspian Gaul adventure? Why do we keep going to this weird masquerade? It's a little different every time, but it's also kind of the same. And kind of discovering what all that meant, was part of the fun, and how it linked up to the bigger campaign was really great. Like I said, very, very, unusual narrative, but I liked it.
Yeah. How many Caspian Gauls did you end up doing? I knew there were 3. Did you do more than 3?
There were 5 in total. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And in the backstory, like with one of your characters, we discovered in the backstory that the characters had been doing it dozens of times, right? Like they had been repeating this Caspian Gaul masquerade ball, like over and over and over again. The 5 times we played it were just the ones that we saw, in play.
Yeah. And I love that. Like, I think that is really clever, to just highlight that these characters have lives that us as players do not see.
Right.
And I think that's something that doesn't happen often enough in play.
Well, it served a really good practical benefit for the campaign too, which is I like to just kind of get things going. I like to just hit the ground running. I don't care to hear about all your character's backstory. And, I just want to kind of figure out all that stuff in play. And so the Caspian Gaul frame was really terrific because it let us introduce new characters. And because it was kind of like a weird dreamlike space, we didn't care about their character's backstory, right? We were putting all these characters together right here to do this thing, and we'll figure out their backstory later. But right now, this strange thing is what's going on. And so in that sense, it was also a good way of like beginning each series because it kind of dropped all the player characters in the middle of things, right? And it worked out great. Right.
So we were talking a bit about how we as a play culture have decided that we will have open table with a revolving player character count and cast. How many players did you end up with throughout this campaign?
I didn't actually do that math, but I just kind of ballparking it. I would say at least 20. Yeah. I mean, I had you and Garrett to some degree, you to some degree, Garrett to some degree, and Fraser for the entirety of it. You were kind of there through a good portion of it. You were there for a lot of the story, but otherwise the tables rotated in and out a lot. And what was great about it was even the people who were only there for a few sessions, they didn't have to know the bigger campaign story to enjoy what was going on at the moment,
Right. Yeah. So did you find yourself taking time to get them up to speed, or did you just go and rely on your returning characters to get them up to speed to the extent that they needed to be, or was that just disregarded?
Well, so that was the thing. Because it was kind of like a Groundhog Day thing, there was actually a great reason for the other player characters to not necessarily talk to the new characters about what was going on, because the player characters were all kind of like, it was kind of like the Matrix, right? Like they were just kind of waking up into consciousness and doing this thing, and it all kind of ties into what was going on in the campaign. But so that wasn't super necessary. Like they were always meant to feel a little sort of unmoored, you know, that was kind of like that became the goal of the story, as like this sort of weird unmoored feeling. And so that wasn't a huge deal. I did always explain the basic premise of the campaign, because the campaign did have a basic premise, and I've talked about that in previous episodes. It did have a basic premise, and I would explain that. I would give them just enough to understand what was going on in that moment, but otherwise we just kind of let it spin out and see what happened.
Cool.
So the unusual narrative was great. There were some terrific character through lines in this campaign that I just want to touch on. First of all, Fraser's thief, Weary, was in every session except for the side story. He was in the other 23 sessions, and he got to level 10 and retired his character, something that has never happened in hundreds of sessions of Dungeon World games. And I tried to kill that fucker. Oh my God. Like I was trying to kill Weary. I did not want him to get to 10th level, because it just was a sort of, I don't know, it became a weird game for me at a certain point. But the thief has a lot of move selections that make it really hard for the GM to take the thief out. So at a certain point, Fraser was just like kind of building his character to survive the whole thing, you know, which was kind of a fun little meta thing going on.
Yeah.
But he was definitely like our cipher for the story, right? Like we see everything essentially through Weary's eyes, because Weary was the consistent character through the whole thing, or most of it. Garrett's character Archon, he played like a scion dwarf, and that character was so weird, just so damn weird and so strange. And the weirdness that Garrett was bringing to that character really, really informed a lot of the campaign world. Like,
it defined it early on. I was there early on.
Yeah, it really did. And again, it kind of goes to this idea of like emergent collaborative play. Like whether Garrett realized it or not, his weirdness and the weirdness, he was this sort of like strange cosmic, bizarre way he was running his character really informed the overall bigger fiction, because it kind of had to, right? Like you couldn't make that character work without conforming the world to that character, you know, because he was so about like his character almost didn't exist in the real world. His character existed in this strange like spirit world, like at all times, and so you had to kind of like bring in those weird cosmic elements to make that character work.
Yeah, his character was a little bit reminding me of the FBI agent in Twin Peaks. Like,
oh yeah, oh god, it really was. It was like a fantasy Dale Cooper. It really, really was.
Yeah,
that's a great observation. Actually, it's a good analogy. So I love that character. Your character Logan, and then your later character Isabella. That was a terrific like storyline. Just because basically you started the story with Logan, and then when Logan, spoiler alert, when Logan got killed, Isabella, who was Logan's companion of sorts, you know, you took over with Isabella, and you were able to use Isabella to further define Logan and to almost continue Logan's story in a way, which I thought was really interesting. But through this perspective of Isabella. So I loved all that. I thought that was a really, really great thing. And then finally, in terms of interesting character through lines, we had several priest characters because I had a really limited playbook selection. There weren't many you could choose from, and priest was one of them. And we ended up having a lot of priest characters. And the religion of the world ended up being a big, big, major part of the campaign world, right? The overall story. And it all had to do with basically the gods being false, essentially. And the priest characters were so interesting because they, as players, they knew it. They knew that was kind of what was going on. And so it was fun to watch those priests in the fiction behave like priests and call upon these deities or these saints, but also like putting a dark twist on it. Like that was great. Like the priest players always did a great job of acknowledging that their gods were false, even if the characters didn't know it, and sort of like shaping the fiction to reflect that. And it was really good.
That's awesome.
So, I just wanted to call out a few of those things. Some looking ahead, matters here. Fraser is putting together a brand new pocket-sized play series. It's going to be We Hunt the Keepers. It's going to be separate from the main pocket-sized play. It's going to be kind of a spin-off series. So that's coming. You will be able to listen to all of We Hunt the Keepers in short 20 to 30 minute bursts. So, That is going to be a really cool thing to look forward to if anybody's interested in this.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I didn't know he was doing that. That sounds great.
Yeah, we've finished the first two already. We've already done Song and Children of the Eight-Legged She. So we're just we're pressing forward with that. So.
Fantastic.
And then also we are continuing this campaign world for 2018, but with a different frame. It's going to be called Songs of the Shadow Court. It's going to be springboarding off the organization that Fraser's character worked for. Fraser's character won't be in that series. He's retired, but the Shadow Court was a major part of the story for We Hunt the Keepers. And so we're going to be doing a Shadow Court focused campaign in 2018. I'm going for a very high competence, almost James Bond style fantasy spy thing with that one. So it'll be a good change of pace. Should be fun.
Cool. So you're going to continue running that in Dungeon World, or are you going to run that in
that's going to be Dungeon World? Yeah,
okay.
that's my Dungeon World thing for 2018. So if you're on Gauntlet Hangouts, or if you're a $7 patron of Gauntlet Hangouts, folks, you can try to get into those games. So
that's really cool. Was there like a grand finale of this campaign that kind of like defined its ending, or?
There was, yeah. I don't know if I could say what it was with it making any sense right now, but yeah, the story was resolved. So, yeah, there was a resolution, and it was maybe not a hugely satisfying resolution, or, well, it was not a hugely it was satisfying as players. It was maybe not hugely satisfying for the characters. So we'll just put it that way.
All right. Well, I'll look forward to hearing that in the pocket-sized play.
That's all I got, though.
Let's move on to our next segment. Our next segment is What Should I Be on the Lookout For?
Plundergrounds. Plundergrounds number 5 is out. Ray Otis, we've had him on before to talk about this. This is his Dungeon World zine, and I think it was number 5 that just came out. The Far Arrhenius. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Arrhenius. I was gonna wait for you to say it, because I had no idea.
I think it's the Far Arrhenius or Arrhenies. I'm not totally sure. But in any case, it's out in the world now. It is fabulous. I'll tell you, I don't know if listeners know this. I don't know if we've ever talked about it, but I do the developmental editing on Plundergrounds, right? Ray writes it all, but he then sends it to me, and I go through it really carefully and make sure it all makes sense, especially in terms of like Dungeon World's mechanics, right? And so I've had a chance to see Plundergrounds and observe Plundergrounds, and indeed work a little bit on Plundergrounds throughout its its life. And I've seen the way Ray has developed this project, and it's great. I mean, he's doing so many cool things. He's starting to kind of like link them all up, to be this sort of like almost like a campaign world in a way. And they make references and callbacks to each other. It's just really good. I think, and I think the quality of them, they were already pretty good to begin with, but I think the quality of Plundergrounds it's just shooting into the stratosphere at this point. Like, it's an amazing value.
Yeah, it's so good. I look forward to issues every time they come out. And this marks 1 year of Plundergrounds for Ray. 5 issues in 2017. And they're all so good. They're all so
good. I know. Like, it's crazy. I mean, I'll tell you, his Patreon is really successful, and he's doing well with it, which is great. And what I think is really interesting that Ray does is Ray basically pours every single dollar back into Plundergrounds, right? Like, I mean, he's just increasing the amount of art. He's increasing the quality of the production in terms of the layout and stuff. He's getting lots of good feedback from people, including me. And it's just a terrific project. It's like the easiest $2 in the world. Like, go to Patreon and give him $2. I swear to God. It's such a no-brainer if you're a Dungeon World fan. But as this particular issue, the Far Arrhenius, it basically details a sort of fantastical island city that lies kind of both on the open sea and at the edge of an astral plane type space called the Luminiferous Ether. It's a city that is reached by both normal ships and airships. And the bulk of Plundergrounds 5 goes through this city. It details it. So there's like guild masters and merchants and noble houses and ship captains and numerous custom moves and other little morsels that kind of bind it all together. That's the bulk of number 5. There's a second part for this one called Up from the Deeps, and it details a community of Tritons that live in the waters near this city. And so it has monster stats and other moves and things and items. And then part 3 is called Into the Ether, and that details the manner and challenges of traveling through this astral plane like luminiferous, I think I'm saying that right, luminiferous ether. So you're getting a lot in this single issue. You're getting this city, these tritons, and basically what is Spelljammer, essentially. It's kind of a astral Spelljammer thing. Pretty dope.
Yeah, it's really good. I mean, you get basically a really good kind of interesting hub city to launch out of and have players trying to trade for things there that you could not trade for anywhere else. And I mean anything. Like you can find somebody who can trade you the ability to do things, skills. You can find somebody who's dealing in dreams. You can find anything in this city. And what do they want in return? Probably something really, really hard to find. Probably something that you'd have to get from a Triton female who have never been seen by human eyes, or from the ether. And both of those things are just right there, but incredibly dangerous as far as Ray has outlined them.
Yeah, I think that's what's great about it. Like it's definitely like a launching point for a campaign, right? Like there are so many little tidbits and details and actually a fair amount of support material too. The thing is like 32 pages long, right? It's a great little like jumping off point for a whole like big sprawling campaign. And I just love it. I think it's so cool.
Yeah, it's really good. It comes with 2 already built in, like basically Grim Portents, fronts, one with the Tritons and one with the Ether. It's like, this is so good.
Yeah.
Really easy you read this from cover to cover, 32 pages, and you could run, 5-6 sessions easily.
Easy. Yeah, easy. And then have plenty of material to develop more, right? So
yeah, absolutely.
So cool. Very easy recommendation. It's on Patreon. I think it's a $2 pledge. So Ray Otis.
Let's move on to our next segment. Our next segment is What Here Is Not What It Appears to Be.
I want to talk about Cast.The, the move for both Wizard and Cleric, and how to handle the 6- results, because I think that can be a little tricky. What do you think?
I'm interested to hear what you have to say about this, because I don't necessarily think it's more difficult than 6- on other moves, but I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
That's fair. I guess. Well, allow me to deepen my thought here a little bit. I think that the moves are written the same essentially, right?
Right.
Like they have more or less the same text. I mean, I think they switch out deity for some other wizard thing, in the text for the cleric, but otherwise it's the same move. But here's the thing. I think that like thematically, wizards casting spells and clerics casting spells are 2 really freaking different things, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so I think that's where I want this conversation to go, right? Like, I think that it's important to look at, to understand those thematic distinctions between clerics and wizards and how that informs your 6- results. So I have some general advice here. This is good for, honestly, any kind of 6- result in Dungeon World, but I think it's worth keeping in mind. I was really thinking about this hard. So normally I don't stress worrying about the actual text of the GM moves once you've memorized them, right? Because honestly, to me, most GM moves, and this is true of most PBTA games, most GM moves boil down to do something that would be of interest to someone at the table, right? Like that's kind of what they essentially boil down to, right? It's a reaction to whatever's going on. That said, I think that looking at the GM moves through the prism of miscast magic or magical problems or trouble can be quite inspiring. And so just at the outset, like, don't forget to look at your GM moves. I think that it's easy to get out of the habit of paying attention to your GM moves. And so always kind of go back to that if you need to. The bigger piece of advice I want to give here, though, and I think it's really important, a misresult on cast a spell is a great time to do a mini cliffhanger. Okay, so the wizard has just cast Fireball, got a 4 or 5 or whatever, right, on the roll. Fireball is a pretty powerful spell. That could be trouble, right, on a miss. I love playing that up at the table, okay? Like, I love telegraphing to the player characters that, oh, fuck, the wizard just miscast Fireball, or something's about to go bad with this Fireball. And I will sometimes cut away, or even or even if I like really want to, like, if I want a minute to think about what I think might happen, I'll take a little break, right? And kind of leave them on that, like, oh shit, we're all about to get consumed by fire sort of moment. And then take a little break, let them wallow in that for a minute or two. But also be thinking about what I want to happen, right? Like using the break time to actually think about what I'm going to come back and hit them with. So never let a miss on cast a spell go to waste. That's what I say. It's such a great opportunity to really fuck with the players. Another thing, just general advice. If you're having trouble thinking of what to do on the miss, like if you have, if you're on your third, magic missile that randomly hits someone else or whatever, right? Or your third fireball that blows up on the wizard, on the wizard and consumes everybody. Like if you can't just think of anything, don't be scared to disclaim decision making and just ask the table for their advice. Particularly for spell flubs, I find players will want to help out with that, right? Like that is the kind of thing that players love, right? Like how to make a fucked up spell like really fun and bad. And especially if you have a sort of play culture that embraces danger and embraces like adversity. And I think if you're running a good Powered by the Apocalypse style play culture at your table, I think that's what they should be doing. That's an easy decision to make. Like just let the table decide. They're going to come up with something really good, right? And last little bit of general advice. The spell doesn't have to go wrong at all. Okay. Don't forget that. The spell can totally go off fine. The miss might not have anything to do with the spell at all. Instead, you're given permission to just make a GM move. So maybe that's a monster move. Maybe you advance your Grimportance, something like that.
Right. Yeah, that's what I was going to say about this is like, don't fall into the trap of like, oh, it's a missed result. Like they misfired their spell. Like maybe they did. That can be an interesting outcome. But if it's at this moment in the story, if that's not an interesting outcome, advance a front or do something else that is a GM move, as opposed to just like saying, oh, it didn't work out the way that you hoped that it would work out. Because that's kind of more the 7 to 9 realm. 6- can be a lot of different things. It certainly can be the spell goes wrong, and it could go wrong in really interesting ways. But sometimes it's just a GM move somewhere else. Like if you're rounding up the fight and like this was going to be a great moment for that wizard to end the fight, and like the fight was kind of rounding out anyways, have that go off, but like something else bad happens.
Yeah, and this is great advice for just Dungeon World generally, right? I know from looking at conversations on the internet that many, many people forget this aspect of running Dungeon World. They think that the miss result must always tie directly to whatever the character was trying to do. That does not have to be the case, right? It does not have to be the case. The miss result maybe doesn't even mean a failure. It can mean success, but just, again, it's opening the door for the GM to fuck with the party in some way. Maybe the spell does fail. Maybe it just fizzles, but then and also something else happens, right? Just good advice generally for running DW.
Yeah. For spells in particular, I guess like one interesting thing I would say you could do on a 6- result is the spell does not occur, and then you start to introduce basically like a mini Grimportance against the wizard, where something about the spell has like messed him up internally. Like if he cast Fireball, like next time he gets a 6-, just start describing how like feverishly he starts feeling and sweating, and just keep advancing that and like hitting on that with like he's got some kind of magical illness that he's going to need to deal with. Otherwise, something bad could happen, like he could burst into flames.
That's great. Well, that's a terrific segue for like talking about the two different types of cast a spell, wizard and cleric. So yeah, I'm approaching this from a thematic standpoint. So to me, wizards, what's interesting to me about wizards and the way they do magic is that it's a trope, but I think living in the trope here is a good idea. The idea is the wizards are pursuing knowledge and power at the expense of rational or safe behavior, right? Like they are desperately trying to master magic, usually for power, usually to, they're the kind of characters who want to poke at the unknown, right? And even like wrestle and tame the unknown, to tame the cosmic. And so I think that's an important like frame of reference when you're thinking about the wizard and how cast a spell can go wrong, right? I think the easy answer, like we've been alluding to here, and it's a lot of fun, is to just have the spell go haywire, right? I would like to suggest, in order to really give this thematic idea of the wizard striving for power against all, selfishly, right? Like against like the desires of other people, to give that some oomph, what you can do, and I do this, is when the spell goes haywire and damages things or people, leave the wizard alone. Just have it hurt the other party members. That is so good. It creates this really, really interesting dynamic where, okay, the wizard miscast Fireball. It exploded in a massive radius around him, but not on him, right? And that immediately leads to lots of table conversation in and out of character of, wow, we're suffering for your bullshit, right? Like that is a great, just to give that some oomph. I highly recommend it. And again, that kind of goes with this idea of wizards pursuing power, without regard to like how it affects other people, right? So that's one little thing. Another thing you might do, in keeping with this idea is, an easy solution for how to handle miscast spell is to just magnify the 7 and 9 results. And we've alluded to this already. Draw unwelcome attention. That's one of the 7 and 9 results. Could become summon something particularly nasty to you, right? That's an option. Disturbs the fabric of reality, can become a less subtle thing and become a more, overtly strange or dangerous thing, right? Like maybe it causes time to function weird. Maybe it causes maybe it causes like the environment to become strangely colored or just general weirdness starts to like break out in the world, right? Like that's a terrific way of showing how the wizard is messing with something that's bigger than him or her, that is more, that's heavier in a cosmic sense than they are, right? I love that. So disturbing the fabric of reality in a really like overt way. And then the other 7 and 9 result is a spell is forgotten. That you can change that to, this is not as satisfying, but you could go to all spells are forgotten on the 6-, right? Or maybe that particular spell is not able to be memorized for a while. And that kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier about maybe, if a miscast Fireball, maybe that has really specific, outcomes for the wizard, right? Like maybe it's not the Fireball goes crazy. Maybe it has something to do with the wizard's basic understanding of the element of fire that he has to work through, right?
Right. Yeah. I like the idea of the wizard having to deal with like, relearning what the name of fire is or whatever it is like that. And in the meantime, in the meantime, like fire is plaguing him, cause he has not been true to fire or whatever.
Yeah. Maybe there's like elemental fire spirits that like harass him now. Like whenever he lights a torch in the cave and it goes out or it burns him or something, right?
Yeah. Just take that kind of principle and apply it to whatever magic he was trying to use. Let's talk about the cleric though. Clerics, it's trickier with cleric.
It's different, right? And again, going back to, kind of staying with my sort of like thematic frame here, to me, the cleric magic is you are calling upon your god and you're asking your god, you're praying to your god to give you divine power, to give you magical like effects, to aid you in situations. And I think like, on the paper, it's all listed out as like, here are your spells, but I think that's just a convenience, right? Like I don't think clerics in the fiction really think about it in terms of spells necessarily. I think they just think about, I'm praying to my god and I want my god to do something powerful for me, right? It's not like the wizards, like I am memorizing and reading spells and I have my spell book and this is an academic pursuit. Like I don't think it's the same thing with clerics, right?
Right. And
so I think the 6- results can be handled and should in fact be handled a little differently. It doesn't make as much sense for a cleric spell to go haywire. Like why would the god do that, right? Like, it's kind of weird. Like, I guess I could, but it's not as salient for a cleric spell to go wild, because the cleric's motivations are not the same as the wizard's. The wizard's motivation is pursuing power. And so the natural reaction to that is you push too far. And so power goes crazy, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, you think of what a wizard is doing, and I mean, it's a little bit like messing around with computers. You mess up one thing and like it's irrational. It's just code. So you type something in wrong, it's going to mess everything up. But the cleric is supposed to be having some kind of relationship with their deity, and that's what they're calling on. And in relationships, that doesn't really happen in the same way, because if you have a relationship, then they fundamentally understand what you are wanting, and for some reason they're not doing it. And that might be the interesting 6-.
I think so. I mean, I think the good 6- result here, satisfying 6- result, is for the god to be displeased with the cleric for some reason and to punish them in some way. Now, practically speaking, at the table, this is a really, really nice side effect, which is once the 6- result happens, maybe the spell doesn't go off, and that's fine, but you can hint to the player in some way that their deity is displeased, but you don't have to immediately show the negative consequences of that displeasure, right? And that's super convenient as a GM, because it gives you time to think about it, right? You can unfurl that later. You could even go so far as taking it as hold to spend later, right?
Yeah. Another way that you could go with this is they roll their dice, they get the poor result, you tell them it doesn't work, and then you ask them, who is the enemy of your deity? And you find that out, and then you let them know, whatever that entity is, it has taken note of you, and it is opposing you.
That's good too. Deity. Yeah, I like that too. That kind of goes to the, going back to this idea that I said earlier about magnifying the 7 to 9 results. That's a great way of magnifying that 7 to 9 result on Cleric Cast a Spell, which is you draw unwanted attention, right? It's a specific kind of unwanted attention, but it thematically fits.
Right. Now they have to deal with whatever it is that is opposed to their god. And now they're like being drawn into this cosmic war, which is probably a very interesting thing for the cleric to be a part of. And that's what you want out of this. You want to have bad things happen, but still be a fan of the characters.
Yeah, that's what being a fan of the player characters is all about, right? You're absolutely right. It's the 6- result is not meant to be a punishment. It's meant to be making the story more interesting. And I think really thinking about like the thematic disposition of clerics and wizards is a great, great way of making sure you get those results.
Right. But yeah, all that said, it doesn't always have to be about what is going on right there. It can be a Grim Portents or something else. So you've got all kinds of ways of advancing the story and making your players satisfied and being a fan of their characters in the fiction. Anything else on this topic?
Nope, I feel great.
Let's move on to our next segment. Our next segment is What Here is Useful or Valuable to Me?
Okay, so we have received some entries for our Keeper of the Gauntlet Dungeon World contest. David and I have both chosen an entry to read on the air here. David, whose did you choose?
I chose an entry by Danny Hood, and it is based on the Keeper of the Orphan's Kiss title. Who did you choose?
I chose one by Logan Howard. It is The Joyous Pit. There is a keeper title called Keeper of the Joyous Pit, so his is based off that. Do you want to read Danny's?
Yeah. All right, so The Keeper of the Orphan's Kiss. When you stumble upon the skeletal remains of a child, you find a teddy bear, old and worn out, but still in good shape, clutched in the child's arms. When you touch the bear, roll plus charisma. On a 6-, the spirit of the child takes residence in your body. You will sometimes struggle with the child as it attempts to take control of you. When you are presented with a scene or situation that the GM feels a child would want to investigate, and you accept, then take XP. On a 7 to 9, the spirit of the child takes residence in your backpack. You begin to notice that your things are missing at inopportune times. The child has no malice, but it likes to go through your stuff and play with it, and sometimes things don't get put back. The GM will tell you what and when. And on a 10 plus, the spirit of the child begins following you around. The child likes to ask a lot of questions. A stern "don't make me get up" or "I am counting to 3" will usually quiet it down. When you appear at the Black Gate, you see a green field full of kids frolicking and playing games. Death is striding toward you with her arms open wide. You feel something brush past your leg, and a small, translucent child runs to Death and jumps in her arms and kisses her on the cheek. Death thanks you and gives you a reprieve. Until next time.
Huh. I like it. It's super interesting. I can tell that Danny is a listener of Discern Realities because, in particular, that 6- result sounds like something I would have written. It particularly sounds like the mind control custom move that I innovated. I love it. It's good. Yeah. What do you think? Why'd you pick it?
I picked it because it's really good. Like, this is a one-time event, that gets triggered when you find this thing. And like each of the outcomes is interesting and has like a kind of obnoxious result for the player, which is like, that's kind of appropriate. And then like the benefit of engaging with this move is they're going to get a freebie next time they hit the Black Gate, but they don't know that. They don't know that until it happens. Yeah,
it's really clever in that way. I normally don't like it when the 10 plus result feels like a failure, right? Like something bad still happens on the 10 plus. But it's such a low stakes bad result. Like it's not that, terrible. It's just kind of, fun and annoying. Combined with the fact that they're going to get this like secret, get out of jail free card for the Black Gate. I think it makes it appropriate. It's good. Yeah, it's super good.
Yeah. And the other part of it is I love how he took the title, Keeper of the Orphan's Kiss, and really like embodied it here. Never does he have to say this is an orphan, and never does he have to say that like he kissed the teddy bear or anything like that. But like you get that.
Yeah, no, it's super good. Very, very, very evocative. And yeah, like you said, really fun results on each one. Yeah, I'm into it. So I chose The Joyous Pit by Logan Howard. Logan, of course, is the author of the Swordbreaker zine, which we talked about last time. Here's how this one goes. On mossy forest floors, the mouth of Elysium waits for large mammals to feed upon. If anything worth eating walks over it, a wide but shallow pit will open. The creature that falls in will find itself in the grips of dozens of long, wet tongues. Each one is covered in a potent chemical that overwhelms the victim with sensations of pleasure and joy. The ends of the tongues are razor sharp and will begin to dismantle the delighted prey. When you fall into the mouth of Elysium, roll plus con. On a 10 plus, you resist the toxin and climb out unharmed. Describe what it felt like and how you were able to overcome the pleasure tongues. On a 7 to 9, you hesitate before climbing out. Describe the delights that held you in thrall. The GM will tell you what is missing from your body by the time you escape. I love this. This is so good. It is, it's gruesome. It's lurid, which I love. It gives you, it's got some fun little opportunities to sort of like have some fun emergent fiction by talking about like, what it was that what were the joys and sensations you were feeling. Yeah, it's just kind of gross and lurid and cool.
Yeah, I'm really digging it. It's kind of like a really fancy trap too. And springboarding off of our discussion last time about interesting traps, this is a really interesting trap.
This is a really interesting trap. So listeners, we are still taking entries for this contest. Just a reminder about the contest. You're going to create a magic item, custom move, or monster inspired by the Keepers of the Gauntlet titles. You can find a link to those titles on the website. You can submit as many entries as you wish. There's a 250-word limit for each entry. We'll read a couple of them on each new episode of Discern Realities until the contest is over. The winner of the contest will get $25, and they'll also be invited to co-host an episode of the show. Up to 2 runners-up will also get $25. You can send your entries to gauntletpodcast@gmail.com, or better, I think, post the text on one of our G+ posts for this show. The deadline for entries is March 1st at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time.
Awesome. Let's move on to our next segment.
Hey everyone, Jason here. I want to tell you about Codex. Codex is the Gauntlet's monthly RPG fanzine. It features original story games and LARPs, hacks and supplements for existing games, and loads of original artwork. You can get access to Codex by making a $4 or higher pledge to the Gauntlet Patreon. The issue available for January 2018 patrons is called Codex Lies, and it's all about deception. It features 5 ruinous artifacts, a supplement for Dungeon World, Liars and Bastards All, an original story game about fantasy con artists, HGMO Sherlock, a Baker Street reskin of the popular game Hot Guys Making Out, Lies of the Child Kingdom, an OSR adventure and winner of our recent writing contest, and 36 Scoundrels, a miscellany of scum and villainy. Your $4 pledge in January not only gets you a PDF copy of Codex Lies, but your name will also be included in the back of future issues of Codex, along with your special Keeper of the Gauntlet title, so long as your pledge is active. Support everything we do in the Gauntlet, including this podcast, and get access to Codex Lies by going to patreon.com/gauntlet.
Our next segment is What is About to Happen. Listeners, last time we saw St. Evelyn helping out this creature, one of the Stitched, called itself Crew Crack. And it dragged itself along the ground towards St. Evelyn and was going to share some information after St. Evelyn healed it and helped it stitch its own wounds through the power of her deity. But then this Spartan priest that has been lingering around the scene bashed its head in, and a little bit of the clear ichor sprayed across St. Evelyn's face. A little bit probably got in her mouth. He is still pounding away at it, trying to make sure it stays down, and then he stops and looks at you. What were you thinking? What were you thinking, helping the enemy?
What were you thinking? I was just about to communicate with the creature. I was just about to find out what its intentions were, where it came from, what its hopes and desires are. What were you thinking? Why would you just... it was no harm to anyone.
You're mad. You are crazy, like they say. Helping one of the Stitched heal itself. You're going to let it go, too?
What have these creatures ever done to you, sir? That creature in particular.
These creatures are plaguing our town. I ought to have you arrested for aiding them.
And what is your name, sir?
Hamich.
A simple name for a simple man. And what do you do in Felbit, Hamich?
I am the priest here. And what is your business here? Why have you come here? To help the enemy? Is that why you are here?
I was brought here by the herbalist, who has gotten off somewhere, it seems. I was told that there were people who needed my ministration, that I could help in some way. I'm here to simply serve the will of the gods, just like you, sir.
You have a strange idea of who you serve. Do you serve mankind, or do you serve them? Kicks at the corpse.
I serve the gods above all else, Hamich.
Well, if your gods are their gods, then we don't need your kind of help around here.
I do not presume to know what the gods' thinking is, what their motivations are. I only serve them, and I know, and you should know, that we are taught charity. We are taught mercy, and you have not demonstrated mercy to this creature.
Mercy. You want to talk to me about mercy. Look at the town around you. It's crumbling. It's at its knees, trying to scratch a living on this earth. And these vile creatures are like a plague upon it. And you would continue them? You would help them? You would bless them?
I would simply try to know what they are trying to accomplish. Do you know why this conflict has started? Do you know why you're engaged in this warfare? Why you have allowed this town to be brought so low? Do you understand what any of it is about? I don't. Perhaps if we can communicate with the creatures, we can figure out what a way to fix all of this. I don't know. All I know is that he was no harm to anyone, and I was... never mind. Is there anywhere around here I can get lodging? Anywhere, preferably somewhere where there are not bodies hanging. out the windows.
Figure it out for yourself. He turns on his heel, walks away, shouting for anyone who is around to hear, "They are a plague! You do not help a plague. You do not try to understand a plague. The gods have sent a plague upon us. We must endure it."
I want to observe this individual. I would have been paying attention a little bit as I talked, but I was probably kind of in a heated state, so I may not have been paying too close attention. But now that I have gotten, now that I've calmed down a little bit, I'd like to maybe see where he goes, find out what he gets up to, before I go figure out my lodging for the night.
I mean, you can watch him, and he walks to an austere chapel-looking building. It has a pointed spire. It has no adornment, just as he has no adornment, except that of the basic Oron and Lunon symbol. It has no sub-symbol that would define his order, which is defining his order in itself.
Indeed. Might I know something about his order, possibly?
Yeah, you might. Would you like to spout lore?
I'd love to. Yeah, I got a 3.
That's good. So, you see him go into the building, and then he slams the door shut behind him. And then the village gate opens. There is a bit of a hubbub over there as people are pushing and straining to get the thing moving. It's in bad repair. And then you see coming in off the road are what appear to be the remnants of a cavalry that is incredible disarray. They're muddied and bloodied and looks like they just got back from the battlefield. And there's only about half a dozen of them, and then pulling behind them is a cart filled with more bodies than they have living. And then on top of the bodies are the wounded. And they drag across the body of Krukrak. They don't stop for it. They just keep on walking through it. And as soon as they get to the other side, they are rallying in this center of this small village. And loved ones are coming out to try and meet them and account for who's still alive and claim they're dead. And there's a lot more wailing than there is joyous reunion. And a man with no legs drags himself out from an alleyway over to the destroyed remains of Krukrak and begins eating. And we'll end it there.
Nice echo, the no legs person dragging themselves across the cobbles. Very, very good.
That just leaves one final question. Who's really in control here?
Discern Realities is a production of the Gauntlet. We can be found on our website, gauntlet-rpg.com, our newly revamped website, gauntlet-rpg.com. Very easy to use now. Go check it out. We are on Twitter at GauntletRPG. We have a G+ community. Just go to the community section of G+ and search for the Gauntlet. You will find us there. And we're on Patreon. If you want to support us financially, it's patreon.com/gauntlet.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason.
Thanks, David.
Thanks, listeners. That's our show.